This is Tomasz Kirul. I'm a chair of the Southborough. Oh, I guess I'll start over, right? Hey, good evening. This is Tomasz Kirul. I'm a chair of the Southborough Board of the Registrars of Voters. And I would like to call today's meeting on Monday, July 27, 2020 to order.
Okay, I'm going to read the preamble required to do. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order superseding certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's order of March 15, 2020, imposing strict limitations on the number of people that can gather in one place, this meeting of the Southborough Board of Registrars of Voters will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town website, Town of Southborough website at southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event we're unable to do so, despite best efforts, we'll post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Just one quick note, because this is a remote participation meeting, all of our votes must be taken by roll call, and I need, Tomas, for you to call the roll of the members and all of us to say our name and that we're present.
Of course, I would like to call the roll of the Board of the Registrars. Members, please state your names.
James Hegarty.
Tracy Navaroli.
Keith Ackley.
Tomasz Kirul, thank you.
Terrific. The first thing on the agenda is the designation of a chair and a clerk. This is something we typically rotate on an annual basis, and normally the town clerk is the clerk, but it doesn't have to be. Any one of you that would like to volunteer to take the minutes and such like that, you're more than welcome to do it. And does anybody, it's up to you, would anybody have an interest in being the chair for next year? You can rotate or continue, it's up to you, but generally one of the three of you would be the chair for next year.
Tomas, do you want to continue? Or
Unless Keith wants it.
No, I'm happy to learn from you for a year. How's that? And
you're very kind and such a pressure. Sure, no problem. More than happy to serve.
Okay. And I would be willing to serve as a clerk again. So I'll make a motion that Tomas would be the chair and Jim Hegarty would be the clerk for next year. Do you have a second for that motion? Okay. And now take a roll call vote, please.
Tracy Navaroli, aye.
Keith Ackley, aye.
Tomasz Kirul, aye.
Jim Hegarty, aye. All right, so the vote is 4-0. Okay. I sent you a document today. It's just a requirement of Mass General Law that I have to notify the board on an annual basis that I've attended training on election matters. And I attended training on February 5 and 6, provided by the Secretary of State's office. It was on cybersecurity matters. It's kind of actually interesting. It involved a tabletop exercise about possible disruptions to elections, not only from hacking activities, but also from civil unrest or deliberate things. So it was actually pretty helpful. So anyway, I did attend that, so I'm good to go as far as notification for that. The next thing is that pretty much all that we do in the clerk's office, or an awful lot of it, is actually the delegation of your authority. Our authority is the board. Back in the olden days, the registrars would come to the office every day. And if you didn't have these designations, you'd literally have to come in every day to review all the paperwork that we see on a daily basis, to look at the cards that are coming right now for early voting, to verify the information for absentee ballots and so forth. So the things that are typically delegated to the clerk on an annual basis is the authority for us to certify the nomination papers, to verify that the people on the papers are registered voters in Southborough at the address they claim to be, to authorize ballots be issued for mail-in voting, absentee voting, and UOCAVA. And UOCAVA is an acronym for people who reside overseas, both members of the military as well as the public. And what's interesting about that, those voters overseas, is they have a choice as to how they can receive their ballot. They can receive it by email, and return it by email or by fax or by mail. So it's the only time that I'm aware of that people can deliver it by email. One of the wrinkles about that is that they have to sign a waiver that they acknowledge that the vote is no longer secret, because when we print it off, we can see what it is. And we don't have a lot for the presidential election. We're probably going to have maybe, I would guess, between 15 and 20 people. And there's some interesting wrinkles about that, that there are a couple of people called specially qualified voters who have never lived in the United States, yet they are US citizens because their parents were citizens, and or they've never were registered voters at the time they lived in the United States, but because their parents lived in Southborough when they went overseas, they have the legal authority, according to Massachusetts law, to vote in Southborough. So some interesting wrinkles to these laws. I had to verify recently that the family of a lady who's in her 50s who lives in France, that their family once upon a time lived in one of the homes that St. Mark's owns on Framingham Road. So that would gave her the authority to vote in Southborough. So it's kind of interesting. So that's one of the things we do on your behalf. We process all the voter registration forms, both to register to vote, to change party, to change address. We use your signature stamps on the election documents, on the back of the absentee voting forms, on the all the different forms, and also to select election workers. That's actually legally, that can be done a couple of different ways. The Board of Selectmen have the right to select election workers. If they don't do it by a certain day in July, that responsibility defaults to the Board of Registrars. And it varies by town what the tradition primarily is. In Southborough, it's always been either the clerk, frankly, without your authority, or the way I do it is legally it's your responsibility. So you delegate it to me and I pick them. So anyway, I'd ask, make a motion that the board delegate annual delegation of authority to the town clerk to allow the clerk to certify nomination papers, authorize ballots for mail-in voting and absentee voting and UOCAVA voting, process voter registration forms, use the registrar stamps for election documents, and to select election workers.
Second.
Okay. And we need a roll call vote on that one?
Yeah.
Tracy Neveroli, aye.
Exactly. Aye.
Tomasz Kirol, aye.
And Jim Hagerty, aye. Okay, thank you. The next thing, this is a little tricky, this next one, discussing changes in election laws. There was a lot of debate about changes to be made for election laws for this this coming election. And one of the biggest changes you'll see is you all received a postcard that was mailed to your home to enable you to do mail-in voting, okay? From my perspective, the wrinkle is lots and lots of changes on this that have been made. The problem is that the Secretary of State's office has not issued the guidelines they are required to do by that same law by July 15th to tell us how to implement these changes. So we're really in limbo and the clock is ticking on our end. Some of the changes that are made are very significant. For example, they're supposed to once and for all certify one of the electronic e-poll book devices for check-in so we can get rid of the paper. The law also required us to get rid of the checkout person at the elections. We were the only state in the country that had that, and it had no value. There are some significant changes as to when people could request early mail-in votes or absentee ballots. And one of the big changes from my perspective occurs in November. That it's historically been the case is that a ballot only counts, like an absentee or anything like one of those ballots. It only has, it's only valid if it's returned to the clerk's office by the time the polls close on election day.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have parents that would come in, they could come in up on the noontime the day before the election and request an absentee ballot be mailed to their child, say at, UMass Amherst. It's not going to happen. I mean, the ballot, because we're required to mail it to the kid. We can't give it to mom and dad to bring it out there. It wasn't going to fly. So they changed that now that by the Thursday, 4 business days before the election is the last day to request an absentee or early mail-in vote ballot. So yeah, in theory, it could be mailed to somebody and it'll come back quickly. But what's very significant is a change they've made that a ballot can actually count if it is postmarked by midnight on the day of the election, and then there's a few days afterwards allow it to come back to us. Now that exception always applied to overseas voting, but for this one, this is really wild, and I don't quite know how that's going to play out for us. There's a whole bunch of other technical changes, but it just, I'm looking at this. There are changes to 20 24 different sections of the law. And the Secretary of State was supposed to have all of this decided and everything out to us by July 15th. So we have a Zoom meeting with the head of the elections department there on July 30 to hopefully find some of this stuff out. So none of this is really terribly significant to us for tonight. And just to say we're in flux, we're waiting to see how this is going to affect. This will drive the number of election workers, frankly, the type of election workers we need. Changes in here that are relevant to us involve the September 1 primary. It requires us to have the mail-in voting, which you have right now. And that's pretty problematic us right now because the way they sent those cards out, all of you are registered in the Republican and Democratic Party. So the mailing address on that, the label on that had your name and your party. Yet for the 64% roughly of the people in town that are not registered in one of those parties, they had to then, they're required to check which ballot they would like to receive for the September primary. And the problem is a good percentage of those people did not do it. So now we have to go back to them and say, you have to tell us what the deal is. In addition, especially for some of the older voters, it gets confusing because we still have traditional absentee voting going on right now. People can request an absentee ballot, yet then they receive this early voting thing in the mail. And we've had a lot of calls from people concerned about, is this a mistake? Is it legitimate? Is it, whatever. And we run into a few situations where people had absentee ballots where they had been unenrolled and requested Party A's ballot. And now we're trying to figure out they didn't fill it in. They're looking for Party B's ballot. So we'll work it out. I think they can solve that, some of that moving forward, but we've received between 400 and 500 postcards already. And from our perspective, unfortunately, the Secretary of State's office has not, on the cards that you received, they had a barcode on your postcard. We should be able to scan that right in the computer and then enter which election you want. Unfortunately, they will not have their computer upgraded until sometime in August for us to use the feature to do that scanner. And another complication is for the people that requested a ballot, not only for the September election, but also for the November election. We have to enter it twice. And unfortunately, the screen will not properly show us confirmation that we entered the November information properly. So we've given up trying to enter the November election because I just have no confidence it's done properly. So after the September election is over, we'll go back and we'll do everything again. And it's unfortunate, but it's like crying over spilled milk. It doesn't matter. I can't change it. We just have to live with it to do the most accurate stuff we have.
A question for you on that,
Sure.
Jim. So I understand that you will enter the information from those postcards for the September election, and then you will hold on to those postcards to do it again?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have, by the way, we're reaching out to every voter who had only checked off the September election, not November, just to confirm that, in fact, they did not want to vote in November.
Do both, yeah.
And I think I think for most people, it's probably just a mistake. Yet we don't have the authority to put a check mark on that. So we'll actually bring that card to them physically and have them, address it. But no, you're right, Thomas. We will be holding on to those cards and going through it again. It's a lot of work, but I don't really see any other way around it to ensure that we have, accuracy in the process.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Jim, when those cards come in, do you have to go ahead and go and validate that they're registered in town to vote?
Well, no, because they generated the data from the voting active voters as of July 1. So that was their starting point.
Yeah, the reason I asked is we got 3 of them. One from my daughter who lives in Denver. She's lived in Denver for 3 years. And I'm like, I don't know why she'd still be on Massachusetts rolls.
I can tell you exactly why. And that's actually, it's a it's more common than we would like to believe for younger people. When a child moves and we send the census out, a parent may tell us the child no longer lives here.
Right.
So we'll then send a letter to the child and we'll put them in what they call an inactive status of the voting. Under the federal law, we cannot automatically remove them unless the voter does one of 2 things. Unless they register in another town in Massachusetts, in case we delete them, or unless they sign a piece of paper giving us the authority to remove them from the voter rolls. Other than that, we have to keep them on the voter rolls through 2 federal election cycles before we can delete them. So what we do on our side now, what we started doing a couple of years ago, is I have a senior that works with a realtor. We get a list of every house that sells. And as soon as a house is sold, we send those cards to the old residents, all the registered voters. It forwards to the new address, and we have a postage paid return envelope to ask them to sign it and kick it loose and take it off from that. But especially with children out of college, it's a certain, that segment of the population is one that we have on the books that they'll eventually fall off.
Yeah. Okay.
So even if she's registered in another state, it's still going to have her registered in Massachusetts as well?
Yes, in a lot of cases, because most of the states don't communicate with one another. Some states do. New Hampshire is very good about that, and but Florida is not, for example. So that's a problem. There are I think 14 states. I think that's the number, but don't hold me to it. That are involved in some kind of a pact with Massachusetts where they share that information. And we get that occasionally, that you'll have, two James F. Hegarty's with the same date of birth, and we have to, compare that.
Right.
We also do that in Massachusetts with duplicates. In fact, David Coombs, the former moderator, there are two David Coombs, same middle name, same date of birth in Massachusetts.
Oh,
Every couple of years we check on that. I know that happens to be a duplicate. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That inevitably there are people on our books who could well be registered someplace else, and we don't know. We don't know. They haven't removed themselves from the ballots here.
All right.
Yeah. Now it's interesting because on the driver's license piece of it, you can't register in two states anymore. It's amazing how stringent the rules are for that. But on the voting piece of it, that hasn't caught up yet. It's kind of interesting. So.
And you think that would be more important? I mean, on one level, that the voting is correct. So.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. But in terms of for us tonight, we've got to work our ways to figure out what the Secretary of Legislation is going to be and make it work. So that's outside of our control and we're going on. However, for the September 1 election, there is a mandated 7-day early voting. And for a town of Southborough size, it's a minimum of 4 hours. And I'm not quite sure who is thinking about this. Well, the September primary election will be held on the Tuesday before Labor Day. It was initially set for mid-September, but it conflicted with a religious holiday, so they had to move it, and they chose to put it the Tuesday before Labor Day. In addition, before that, we're required to have 7 days of in-person early voting. It runs a Saturday and a Sunday. It's required by the statute. So, I'll grow hair on my head before we have folks coming in on a Sunday afternoon to vote. And the other
I'll do it for you, Jim.
The other complication of this is we can't hold it in the townhouse anymore because the townhouse is closed and open by appointment only. So what I would like to do, and this actually is your decision tonight, I just think that there's going to be a minimal turnout for this September election, and I don't want to hold it any more than the minimum 4 hours. And I talked to the Trotter School, and they would allow us to hold it at the Trotter School from 3 to 7. And we're trying to be careful that window of 3 to 7 that we don't interfere with their activities trying to set up the school, get into the school year.
Yeah.
So that's kind of threading the needle for us. So anyway, I'd like to make a motion that the board vote to set the in-person early voting for the September 120 state primary as 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. from August 22 to August 28 at the Trotter Middle School. Need a roll call?
Second that.
Okay. And all in favor?
Tracy Navaroli, aye.
Keith Ackley, aye.
Tomasz Kirul, aye.
And Jim Hegarty, aye. Thank you. If we jump to the November 3rd state election, there's also going to be a 2-week in-person early voting, including 2 weekend Saturdays and Sundays. That's also a minimum of 4 hours. I don't know yet where we're going to be able to hold that. I'm concerned about holding it at the Trotter School if the school is in session, bringing all the people from the outside into that environment. I'm concerned that if we were to hold it only for 3 hours a day, we would interfere with the gymnasium and the setup. So I just as soon let's not vote on that now. Let's kick that can down the road a little bit. We don't have to decide until the end of September on that. If we could just hold a brief meeting in September, once we kind of see where the schools play out on that. We may have to rent a hall someplace else. I'm looking into some of that right now.
Is there any option at the new public safety building for something of this nature?
I'll look into that, but I think they'd be concerned about bringing that many people from the outside into that. I will follow up on that though.
I mean, that seems like there'd be fewer people in there impacted than doing it at a school.
Yep.
You know, and
Okay.
And there's the ability, you can kind of petition them off, right? So there's a hallway that you can go down into a big conference room that's not going to give them access to any of the police and fire.
And then push them out the back door on
Yep.
that. And that.
One way.
One of the wrinkles behind that is, so let me jump to one of the other changes in the law that they haven't figured out here. For those of you who, and that's what makes this really complicated and from a logistical perspective, for those of you who have voted by absentee ballot or early voting in person in the past, you put your ballot in an envelope, sealed it, you wrote your name on it, and you put it in a box. Under the new law, those ballots are going to be counted and put in a tabulator. And they haven't clarified whether that's going to be only at the early voting in person process or whether it's also going to involve the mail-in ballots. So if we have to do that for the early voting in person process, it's basically going to be like a full election day. With tabulators set up, you put your ballot in, we're going to have to do the whole pre and post processing of it. We won't be able to look at the ballots in terms of hand counts and write-ins and stuff like that. So, and one of the restrictions would be that we'd have to verify that in fact 107 ballots were cast that day, yet we would not be able to print the results to say there was 50 votes for one and 57 from the other. But in terms of setup and takedown and so forth, whatever facility we use, we would have to leave everything up with all the stanchions and the dividers and all the other good stuff. So it's a pretty good ask for somebody to be able to take over their space for 14 days. So I'll look into that. But when you think about the complications of handling the ballots and reconciling that and transporting them and then hiring a police officer, because at statute, only a police officer can transport the voted ballots back to location, and the cost for detail for all that you'd have to hire. It gets kind of complicated on our end.
Well, I mean, from a safety perspective, there's no safer place for it to be. So
I'm with you 100%.
Right. So, yeah. So, and I do understand that is a burden to put on them. I don't know how frequently that conference room is used. They have several conference rooms. I don't think anybody's meeting outside any conference rooms at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Very true.
Yeah. So maybe by that time we might be able to make a better decision, but it certainly, I think, is a great suggestion.
No, I will appreciate that. I will follow up with them on that, and we'll get going.
So Jim, if this is, let's say, not the, a public safety building or not a school, what are the other options for the location?
Well, one of the ones I thought I was talking to St. Anne's Church to see if they would let us use their community hall that has a center entrance, and you could, it's on the ground level, so ADA perspective, it's okay. And then you can go out the far end by their
the side door.
Yeah. And but again, it would have to be, we'd have to be able to leave our gear up. I mean, we'd take the tabulators down, which are basically computers at the end of the night, but you're still talking the stanchions, because it takes you a bit of time to set all that up and rip it down. And from my perspective, if we to be perfectly candid, if we shut this down for the September stuff at 7 o'clock, my day is not going to end till about 10 o'clock every night, just because of the processing we have to do at the end of that and reconciliation and stuff. So, we'll go on that. But I'm going to look
more
at
that you can leave up, the better.
Oh, exactly.
So,
Yeah, exactly. And if not, then would they even allow us to store it right there?
Yeah.
So, but I will definitely look into that and the public safety, and then I'll talk to St. Anne and see if that's an option there as well. We'll see what's going on there.
Thanks.
But there's just so many uncertainties in this legislation as to how they allow this to happen. Well, one thing you're going to see going in on August 1 is there's some estimates that 80% of the voters for the election in November will vote by early voting or mail-in voting or in person or whatever. What I saw when we had the early voting, they just changed the label. It's still the same everything else. Early voting, mail-in voting, it's all the same. But what I saw from the town election and what I saw for the presidential primary is the vast majority of voters did not mail the ballot back to us. They literally put it in the drop box outside the townhouse.
Okay.
Maybe some of that's because the postage was announced and I have 71 cents. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Well,
The
I
state
hate
is,
to break the news, but my husband brought up a really good point that once that ballot leaves your hands and goes in the mail, it's up to several people who are going to touch it. And there's no guarantee that it's going to make it, right?
No, I'm
You
with
don't you don't get a confirmation saying your ballot was received, and processed. So there could be some angry, in a giant city, some angry, postmaster who's tossing ballots. You don't know.
well, a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, I have to give great credit to the new postmaster in Southborough. I went down and had a conversation with him about 3 weeks ago just to see what can we do to improve the process. And he has just been exceptionally good to work with and has given us some ideas as to how we can avoid having our ballots go into Boston to be sorted to come back to us. And they will work with us that we'll deliver them a ballots in a certain way to them directly, and they'll process them locally so they'll be delivered to the resident the next day. So that's very, very helpful. As far as the delivery of the ballot back to us, I just bought a huge blue mailbox. It sort of looks like a UPS. On the front of it, it's kind of square. It's currently in a lobby, and it's going to be installed on August 1 outside on a cement pad because the little green mailbox the town has is not going to be sufficient to hold all those ballots. And I want to give people an opportunity to put a ballot in a secure location just for ballots, not mixed in with other stuff that only somebody can have. So we talked to a vendor today about the signage on it, and DPW will install it by August 1. So when the ballots are mailed out to people, they'll be told they can deliver it to that themselves, or they can bring it in person, or they can mail it, or however they want to do it. Oh, and by the way, the state is paying the return postage for they're paying the postage for the ballots to be mailed out to people and for the return postage as well. So we'll see how that plays out. It's interesting. I've been inundated with calls and emails from people that want to help us with the election that are associated with various political parties and want to know how we're going to prepare for the September election. And my response to every one of them is exactly the way the Secretary of State tells us to do. If you have any questions, call them. I'm not going down that road. I'm not going down that road. So anyway, that's kind of the view from where I sit. There's an awful lot in flux, but I'm actually I think we're very fortunate, to be perfectly candid, to have this state primary coming up in September. I mean, I think we'll have a substantially lower voter participation in this than we would in the November election. And we can work the bugs out of the system, not only here, but in the state. And, frankly, if we make mistakes or something, and we can recover and do a better job in November, we'd be good to go. I do want to share some news stuff that was in the news here a couple of weeks ago after our town election, not involving us, but one of the towns, maybe Grafton, after their town election, they realized there were 200 and some odd uncounted ballots in their vault. And that was a bad day. I don't quite know how that happened to them, but one of the things, you always try to learn from somebody else's mistakes, and you don't wish misfortune on anybody, but one of the things they talked about doing differently is to use color-coded containers. I said, that's a great idea for us. Just one more thing. We have 3 different ways we reconcile every ballot that comes in as to how it's used all the way down the line. 3 completely independent verifications. But in addition to that, we're going to start using color-coded tubs for the 5,500 ballots that is supposed to be delivered any day. The ballots are due any day. The clerk in Nantucket got a text on Saturday afternoon. They were delivered and dropped outside the courthouse in Nantucket. Yeah.
So what are the 3 bins, like processed, not processed, and like problem ones or something, or?
No, we'd start first with the ballots that are not voted, the raw ballots, and then we'd have and then the second category would be just that. You'd have early voting ballots that were received back. You'd have absentee ballots that were received back, and then you'd have ballots that were voted on election day as is. And then you'd have unused ballots that were transported to the polls, brought back. Then you also have the 100 and some odd ballots that are used for test ballots on election day. And then you have any ballots that are spoiled by people on election day.
Yeah.
And add all that together 3 different ways, and it comes back to the total number coming in the door.
Same number, yep.
Right. Yeah,
But when
should be
you
the
when you
same
look at all
number.
the moving parts on election day, it's important to keep track of that. And the other complication is that we have 4 different ballot styles for this election: Democrat, Republican, Green, Rainbow, Libertarian. So, and if you've seen the shoebox of a vault that I have next to me, that's a lot of. It's trying
Real
to put,
estate, yeah.
it's 12 pounds in a 4-pound box. You know, we're trying to make it work. But we're very fortunate. We have Amy is the assistant town clerk now, and she's doing a great job. Really doing a very, very, very happy to have her in there. And we have a new lady that started with us part-time here in July the 6th, Renee Chen. And she has a pretty good IT background, so that's actually very, very helpful to us. And things are moving along pretty well. But that's pretty much what I had of things that I wanted to cover on this for tonight. Do you guys have any comments or concerns or any stuff you'd like to?
Jim, did you receive any slides or any material from your training class that you went to in February? I'd be interested to see what they're providing to you.
Sure.
Okay. Share those, that would be great.
Nope, be happy. I'll send that out to you. Yep.
Okay.
And that was the Secretary of State actually has set up a new election security department or group, and they're doing training to a lot of the town clerk's offices, and frankly, they're trying to get buy-in. The problem that they have, and frankly, in defense of the Secretary of State's office, they're trying to take this new law that was changed and apply it to 351 cities and towns, everything from Boston on one end of the spectrum to the 10 or 12 towns that still do hand ballots. So how they're trying to have one size fits all is beyond me. It's a hard thing to do. And they actually run weekly seminars, sometimes a half hour, sometimes an hour, on different election security issues, computer security issues, basically. And I talked to one of the folks recently. I said he's sort of like a missionary trying to talk to the unwashed as to why this is important. And in one of his Zoom meetings, it was only me and one other person out of 351 cities and towns. But I said, hey, you got to start somewhere. And like I said, none of this is a problem until it's a big problem, you know. So
well, I mean, this presidential election is going to be under a microscope. We're already hearing the gossip of the mail voter fraud is going to be high, you know, so it's just being prepared, having answers. And when people start to talk about it, if you can debunk it as soon as possible,
yep,
you know, it's going to prevent the rumors from propagating. So, and
that was that's actually part of some of the training they had, is to what do you do on election day if somebody puts deliberately false information on social media, and, you know, put something up about a water break blocking the access to the road, or what do you do, or how do you address those issues? And the kind of things that, unless you're prepared to address them in advance, you won't be able to address them in sufficient time to help everybody get out. So it's actually pretty helpful. So I'll be happy to send you what they sent there.
Thank you.
One interest issues on election workers. We had the overwhelming majority of our election workers did not want to participate in the annual town election. If you look at the average age of the election workers and you look at it puts them smack dab in the middle of the high-risk groups and stuff like that. So for the annual town election, I went to Plan B and I brought a lot of high school and college kids with just a handful of wardens, and it worked out beautifully. We're going to have to wait and see who we need for this election, depending upon the Secretary of State's guidelines. And I'm probably going to go with that as well. Bring the kids that can still help on this. And I think it's a great way to engage kids in the whole process. You know, if you get one kid who's doing it, it's just going to really, it'll encourage kids to get involved, yep,
register to vote, all of the things that they need to do to learn about what it really means to, you know, have a democracy. So kudos to you for getting those kids in. And well, you know, and the older folks, I mean, they're going to be their feelings are going to get hurt. You know that.
Well, a lot of them, I had private conversations and they were frankly glad they weren't asked. They didn't want to be put in an uncomfortable situation. And some have told me they'd like to continue to be involved, but they have a spouse at home that has major issues. And that's the problem. So we're trying to find a way to keep them involved, but keep them out of the mix. As far as for bringing the kids in, I may deserve a little bit of the credit, but the 4 different kinds of cookies that we brought that day certainly had a lot to do with keeping them all involved. That worked out well. Very different food for the young kids versus some of the older folks, you know. but that worked out pretty well. So we're going to continue to try to thread the needle, so to speak. And I have received a couple of emails from people who have offered to help. And also the Rotary Club has offered to help with elections as well. And there's a fellow in town by the name of Rob Bussey, who is in Rotary, and he's also one of the computer security guys for the Secretary of State's office. And he wants to start a statewide project for having Rotarians assist at elections. So I'll be meeting with him to talk about it. One of the things we might be able to use them for would be the health screening that we did before people entered the Trotter school.
True.
And we had 2 kids outside that asked them, basic question, do you have a temperature, been exposed and stuff like that? And we had a plan in place that if in fact somebody had a temperature or had been exposed or had the rest of it, they would still be allowed to vote. I would consider that to be a medical exception to the absentee rules, that if somebody's been admitted to a healthcare facility within so many days of the election, the clerk has the right to hand deliver a ballot to them. So if we had somebody at the election that had one of these medical conditions, I would liken that to be one of those absentee things. And I would offer the person the opportunity to absentee vote right then and there. So they can still vote in person, but they're doing it by themselves. And if the person declined that offer, then what I would do is have them wait until everybody had cleared out of the space and then bring them to one at a time. And I would process them on all the ends. And we did have people set up when we did the town election. Every time somebody left one of the voting locations, it was cleaned before the next person came into play. So we will still engage those safety measures for this next election as well. So we're just going to have to see who we use, how many we use. It's all driven by what the Secretary of State tells us, hopefully on the 30th, and we'll see what happens from there. So anything else anybody wants to talk about here? Or? Okay. Well, I'll circle back to you. I'll shoot you
One
an
more
email.
thing, Jim. When is the next meeting? When do you want us?
It'll be sometime in mid-September, late September. We'll have to pick, once we get a handle on what we can do for the
For November.
yeah, we'll take a look at that. And just one thing I did not put down here, I should have mentioned this earlier on. When we're talking about November, when we get to November, I'd like to see if we couldn't pencil in a date after the election, a couple of days afterwards, because this for the November election, there is going to be a state mandated recount of a certain percentage of precincts at random. I don't know who it's going to be. When we had the presidential election 4 years ago, I just had a bad feeling we we're going to win that lottery. So I actually set it up, and we did. And they chose precinct 3, and they chose only 3 of the races. So we literally had to do a hand count of every single ballot.
It was interesting. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. And Keith, the way it worked out is that the registrars, the 3 of you sat at a table up front, and you decided and took a vote on individual ballots. And we came out very close to what we expected. So I think we were up 2 in one race and down 1 another. And that's for the number of thousands of ballots that went through. We did well.
Good.
So anyway, just in case that pops up, so get on your schedule, we'll figure it out.
All right. And but tonight, did you want to also approve the minutes?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. So actually what I'd like to do, if we're done, is for this meeting right here, everything went pretty much according to plan. On the top, the meeting started at 7:31. We'll have a motion to adjourn at 8:10. And can we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented, the draft minutes presented to you earlier? And I'll add the chair in here as Tom and me as the clerk. And if we can have a motion to approve these minutes.
Okay. I so move.
Okay. I second. And all in favor?
Tracy Neveroli?
Roll-
Aye.
Roll call. Yeah.
Great. And I'll say,
Exactly. Aye.
and we have a motion to adjourn at 8:10.
Second.
Great. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I'll keep
Thank
you
you.
posted if anything significant pops up.
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
Have a
Stay
good night.
safe, everyone.
Have a good night, guys.
Goodbye.
Take care.
Bye.